So I want to briefly take a look at this. There's another supplement kind of covering this, but we're going to take a quick look and talk a little bit more about evaluation. So in evaluating assignments, we're really looking at the tools and how this is used. So here we have the color window, HSB sliders. We're looking at this first one here. This is red. Red is identified by both 0 degrees and 360 degrees. This is the top of the circle. We're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. Fully saturated hues showing no white, 100% here in the S value, 100% in the B value, also indicating no black. So no white, no black. You got yourself a fully saturated hue. So transitions of hue, we want even gradation. So that's where you're looking that meet that criteria. We're looking to exceed it by having that smooth gradation. They're all fully saturated. So try to have something maybe a little uneven, something a little kind of not predictable. I'm going to go with simple 5 degrees. Just so that it's not something that you would want to have. Excuse me there. I had continuous unchecked. That's why I did that. So something that you wouldn't do in your assignment anyway, because you never want to have the same colors that I use in an example in your assignment. So we're just doing simple 5 degrees here. So it's 0, 5, 10, 15. We're slowly moving to orange. You're seeing that orange come out now. And so this would be meeting the criteria. For a basic assignment like this, and everything's pretty straightforward, probably going to be treated as exceeding the criteria in this case. And so now you're seeing orange come out here at hue 30. That would be orange. So they're an equal part of yellow, equal part of red, orange. So you should get the idea there. That's probably the easiest part of this assignment right there. Gradation and value, fixed hue. So what we're looking for here, a value range is white to black. You want your hue in the center. You can extend any of these scales from this week. You can feel free anytime you want to have these transitional steps, go out one more if you want to have it. Don't make them shorter. I don't want to see any of these be shorter than what they are. Right now, this has 9 transitional steps. It's 10 steps total, 9 transitional steps. We talk about that a little bit more in the other one. Don't want to go into that again. But when we're looking at this for grading criteria, we're going to look at this in RGB. So looking at it here, starting with black. Black is going to be all three values being 0. So I switched that to eyedropper tool shortcut I. See the R, G, and B values are all 0. Transitional step, first one is 64 units of red. Next one's going to be another 64. So there's your even transitional steps. You're going from 0, 64, 128. This next one would be another 64. So that's what we'd want to see is these transitional steps. As you go across, it's going to change. You're possibly going to come into adding another one, depending on what your colors are. That's fine as long as those transition steps are even. I would possibly anticipate when you hit fully saturated that something else may come into play. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case, depending on what you're doing. But we'll look at that in a case by case basis. And the reason why that will be is because white is going to be all three values at 255. Black, all three is 0. So fully saturated red is going to be R255. And then for white, these green and blue values would start to go up. So that's where you would start to see something change. But if you follow the tools will do that for you. And then I can follow that for you. So looking at this last one here, here is where you're changing two aspects. You're changing both the saturation and the value. So these RGB values aren't going to be as consistent. So we're seeing here a 42 unit change, and then here it's not quite that. It's a little bit smaller, and then it's changing again. And part of why that happens is because you're adjusting the value as well. I'm going to focus my attention on the value. So if we switch this to the grayscale slider, comes up as K. This is standing for black. We're going to see that it starts off at 58. It's 58 for these first three. That's where I'm going to focus my attention. That the value's fixed and that there's no real crazy changes in RGB. If there's something crazy going on, I'll address that. We'll also check it in HSB to make sure that the hue remains fixed. That it's, in this case, red. Please don't use red for this assignment. I don't want to see red here. It's been used for the example. It shouldn't be used again. And for that case, I'm going to use red for most of the examples. So you really shouldn't be using red in any case. but the hue should remain fixed. Remember, it says fixed hue here, fixed hue here. That should be red the whole way across. So in this case, we're looking for that fixed value. We're looking for that fixed hue, and we do want to see that transition be somewhat consistent. It's not going to be as fixed as we saw here, but it should still be somewhat consistent, and we can talk about that a little bit more. That fixed value when we're sacrificing color here to maintain that fixed value, and I talk about that in the other one as well, but we can go over that a little bit more. We'll do an image mode grayscale here. I like to do that. You'll see me do that often. The value here is fixed. It's a little bit darker here. There's not a huge difference in value, and it's partly why we're not seeing it, because I haven't changed all these saturation. We go back, you would see that a little bit different, but again, it's covered in more detail in the other one. So let's go ahead and look here at the tints here. So a quick recap. So let's go ahead and turn our continuous on. Our to do tints, Control U brings up hue saturation tool. Remember, 9 transitional steps, divide that by 100, we get our 11 units. That's why you can extend that out. You extend that to 10 transitional steps, you'll get our 10, just recalling that. So let me go ahead and do a couple here. And again, we're looking for those RGB values. So if we switch this back to RGB, we're going to see these smooth transitions that we're looking for going across. And that's going to be key here. So we're starting off. Our red here isn't fully saturated. Not sure why, but we're starting off with the G and V values at 42. They're increasing about 23 units to 65 here, increasing another 24 units to 89, so still within that range. So we're seeing that transitional step. If we did this one more time, we'd see about that same step here, that 243 going up 1, 2 here. So again, those transitionals should be consistent throughout. Likewise, when we do the shades, Control U, where this time we're doing a -11. Remember, still same number of transitional steps, it's going opposite direction. And to evaluate, we're using those RGB values. This is for exceeding the criteria. We want this to be very smooth. The method shown in the lecture of using that gradation will meet the criteria, but it's not going to give that same precision that this method's giving. So we're going to see that decrease. Those G and V values are decreasing by 5. Here, decreased by 4. Remember, we're looking at those rounded numbers, so that 4 to 5 range is fine. Looking at that R value, we see this first step decrease by 27. This next one's decreasing by 26. So 27, 26 is that range there. And if we carried this out one more step, we'd see that same thing going on here. For tones, we can go ahead and do a few of these. Here we want to see going lighter, going darker, going constant. We talk about that in detail in the other videos, but let's go ahead and do a few of these again, just to kind of recap on that as well. So saturation, same process here, -11, doing our 9 transitional steps. Feel free to extend that out if you want to. And for this one, I would feel free to go ahead and do one of these, all 3 of the tone scale, copy it, and then adjust the value for all 3, and I'll show you that right now. Just a little bit of a shortcut. And after you do this a few times, this will be fairly quick. I got a new keyboard, so it's a little slower. It's one of those ARC ones, so there's not a control on the right side, so I'm trying to get used to that. Slowing me down a little bit. Last one there. Let's use a slider here. And most of the words, you notice the sliders here in the word. It's also below. Most of them are like that for those of you that aren't familiar with that, just to recap that. So we can select all of these. please make sure you're doing a good selection. As I mentioned in other videos, I'm not too worried about presentation for the videos. I'm more worried about doing this quickly for you. You can just repaste these over, make sure to get a good selection, and then kind of just copy and paste these all three. You'll have a good transition of saturation, and then work on the value. So let me go ahead and undo that because I don't want to have that there because I didn't make a good selection. So going to the darker value, you would first want to establish the value you have. So let's go ahead and make a good selection. Let me pause this. I'll make a selection, and then I'll do all three of these. So there's my extra ones I have. I now have these three layers. If I want to flatten these three layers, I can go ahead, Shift, select all three, right click, merge layers. So now on one, I actually have this background layer because I added this originally when I was opening the files. If this is locked and you're having trouble with it, you can left click on it twice, name the layer, or just leave it layer 0 will be the default name. Hit OK, that'll unlock it. That often resolves some of the problems. If you also want to flatten your layers, you can do it here. Sometimes that'll resolve some of it, but it will relock it. Just hit OK. That's a common solution to some of the problems students encounter who are unfamiliar. So when we're looking at making this a lighter value, first thing we'll do is establish this first value here. It's 58% K. Let's go ahead and take this 3 units 3% down. So we're going to go 55, 52, and just bring it down from there. So we're going to go back to our hue saturation tool. Let's first select this one, Control U. And we want to take this to 50, so it's 58. We're going to take it to 55. Lightness slider, we can see the K. Remember, we're selecting this one first, as we saw in the earlier video. This should just be a recap. You shouldn't be starting here, so just to make sure that's clear to everybody. So 58, we're going here to 55. It's measuring at 60 right now. We can make it lighter here and going to 55. So here we want to go to 52. Measure it, it's at 60, just slide it until we see it, 52 in the color window, hit OK, and this would be exceeding the criteria by having this very clean, precise steps. So we're looking for 49 here. This is pretty straightforward. Once you get the hang of it, I know this is going pretty fast right now. So this last one here was 49, we're going to go 46. But these steps, once you get the hang of them, it should be fairly easy. By the end of the course, you should be able to do this with pretty easy. So 43 is this next one. I'll go ahead and do this next. We'll skip down to the consistent one you should know. So the next one is a darker value. Now here you don't want to go too dark. So think about this. You're not going to want to go by 5% because then you'd be past 100. You'd be going to black. You don't want to do that. So again, we'll go with something. Let's go with 2. That's pretty safe. So we're going to go 58, 60, 62. You could work this out. If you need to write it down, feel free to write it down. So here we'll go 62. We'll start with 60. The first one's 58. We're going to go 60. This one's already 60, so we don't need to make a change. You could have checked that beforehand. This next one we'll do 62. And it's very helpful that you can, once this is set to the grayscale slider, that you can see the change as you're changing the lightness here. I think that's very important to make that observation now, because later on when you're trying to make changes to value, that you can do that without having to kind of go back and forth. So this one's 64 that we're looking for. And later on, as you become more familiar with seeing value in color, you won't really have to rely on the tools as much. You'll start to see this value a little bit more. Right now, I don't really expect you to be able to identify value as accurately, but the tools will really make it much easier for you. Often something yellow is one example I'll use. Yellow is not often identified as light as it is. Let's go ahead and do one more. We'll do 68 here. And then we'll make that be the last one. And then blue is often another one. It's very dark. So let's go ahead and do an image mode grayscale. We'll take a look at this before we run out of time. And so you can see this is slowly progressing lighter. This is slowly progressing darker. This was 3%. This is 2%. We can see those differences. And this is that level of precision we're really looking for. This is that exceeding the criteria. So we're really pushing those limits. So often in the lecture, it's going to give you how to meet the criteria. Supplements are going to focus on exceeding the criteria. And those are differences we want to make. This week we can definitely extend these templates if we want to have that extra step. Feel free to do that. But of course, if you ever have questions, feel free to let me know.